Hello and welcome to Total Football Analysis. In this video we will take a closer look at the work Mourinho is doing at Tottenham Hotspur and if the team is going in the right direction with him at the helm. This tactical analysis will shift towards Tottenham Hotspur's attacking and defensive tactics, identifying some of the most prominent strategies the Spurs are using within Mourinho's philosophy, but also some of the areas that are still lacking. This analysis is part of the March edition of our monthly magazine. You can find the link to our magazine in the video description below. In 2019-20 and especially under their new coach, Tottenham Hotspur have mostly set up in a 4-2-3-1 system, favoring it in 33% of all the games played throughout the campaign and across all competitions. Even though it is a 4-2-3-1 on paper, and that's usually how Spurs would start their games, but once they get into possession, this system changes to a 3-2-5 or a 3-2-4-1 formation, with the left back staying behind to form a back three and the right back will step forward into the midfield or even as high as the wingers. This all highly depends on the personnel Mourinho chooses. Ben Davies and Jan Vertonghen are more defensive-minded, so that makes the left more pragmatic in the first place. Aurier, on the other hand, is a much more attacking-minded player and the coach is using his skill set quite well. It does seem like Mourinho is still experimenting with his squad, but generally, he favors a more direct approach that completely bypasses the middle of the park and aims to advance through the flanks for the majority of the time. His pivot duo affects this massively. At the moment, only Harry Winks seems like a certain pick for the coach, while his partners will change. Depending on the choice of that second midfielder, Spurs possess or don't possess a dose of press resistance in their pivot line. Winks can carry the ball forward and spray it wide if necessary, but Dyer is not as comfortable in possession and can be forced into mistakes. Notice here how a somewhat usual scenario for Tottenham Hotspur's build-up tactics might look like. The play is usually focused on one flank, where Spurs can either establish a numerical superiority or just invite pressure while their right back Aurier hugs the touchline on the opposite side and waits for a long ball over the top. But the role of the double pivot is also particularly important and Mourinho seems to like them extremely close to the backline, as a way of solidifying the defense, but also in order to create space in the middle of the park for, once again, a potential long ball all the way from the back. Sometimes when they are pressurized, Spurs will drop deeper with their 5-man defensive squad, but the forwards push the opposition's defensive line further forward, creating a gap in the middle that can be exploited. Once that gap appears, Dele Alli can drop and collect the ball and then progress it forward in a swift transition. Of course, this is easier said than done, and one of the problems Spurs are currently facing is successfully avoiding the press and advancing the ball when pinned down in their own half. Notice in this image how Spurs are one pass away from completely leaving Chelsea in the dust, but a last-ditch tackle from the Blues saves the day. Even though we can often see Tottenham under Mourinho prefer the direct route towards the opposition goal, they do have a couple of tactics in their arsenal that make for some interesting positional play. Their attackers will regularly drop off to help progress the ball. Notice here how Lucas Moura moves into the midfield, which poses a real conundrum for the opposition as they suddenly don't know who to mark in this situation. And due to that, Spurs can advance the ball to a higher platform. Spurs will utilize the attacker's movements to create space behind the opposition backline and will then send a through ball into the final third and into the path of a sprinting teammate. This is a strategy commonly used by Spurs under Mourinho and it usually involves Moura himself. Take a look at a perfect example here where exactly the same pattern happens. The defender is dragged away from his standard position and Spurs can immediately send a long ball over the top to find a runner who is now in acres of space behind the opposition lines. It's a simple technique that's utilized by many teams, but it works like a charm when executed properly. One of the problems, however, that have somehow crept in as of late seem to be connected to Tottenham Hotspur's lack of width in general, but especially on the left side of the pitch. If Mourinho's forwards, who either start the attack out wide or who sometimes drift out there, decide to cut inside, this leaves Spurs without any personnel on that flank and their actions suddenly become too central and can easily be defended against. Note in this example how, once Moura cuts inside from the left, Chelsea can basically disregard the whole flank, since left back Ben Davies does not move up the pitch. Let's move to the defensive style of play of Tottenham Hotspur under Mourinho. One thing that we have seen in Spurs ever since Mourinho has taken over the team is the reduction in pressing tactics. The special one prefers a solid and compact defensive unit over a high pressing one that tries to win the ball high up the pitch. As a result, upon losing possession and during the opposition's build-up play, Spurs will mostly drop into their usual 4-4-2 defensive shape that can turn into a 4-3-3 once the ball is recycled towards the wings and low pressure is applied on the ball carrier. You can see an example of that in this image. This is a stark difference from the system Pochettino preferred, as his team was always adamant in trying to recoup possession higher up the pitch and pressed rather intensely. At the moment, this is pretty evident in their PPDA value, meaning the opposition passes allowed per defensive action, which stands at 12.49 and is higher than in any of Pochettino's previous years in charge. This means that the Spurs press with less intensity under Mourinho. Usual pressing triggers under Mourinho are either miscontrol of the ball or the opposition positioning themselves in the wider areas where it's easier to press them. In those instances, we can see them try to recover the ball at a high pace. You can see an example of a combination of zonal and man marking in the advanced areas of the pitch in this image. Spurs have forced their opposition into an awkward position on the pitch and then aim to cut off all their passing lanes to recover possession in their own half. Additionally, to sheer compactness and the fact that some of their pacey players such as Ali, Moura or Bergmann can stay higher up the pitch means that it's far easier to construct a successful counter-attack, and Spurs have made that a formidable weapon under Mourinho. In that instance, upon retrieving the ball, the goal is to expand as quickly as possible, moving in various different directions so as to dismantle the opposition's compact defensive shape and open gaps through which a ball can be played through. Still, their defensive organization is not without fault, and we've seen some of their biggest weaknesses exposed against Chelsea and RB Leipzig respectively. In both cases, their goal was to overcrowd the middle of the pitch, which also seems like something Mourinho likes to do in order to stop the progression of the ball. Against Leipzig, however, they failed to cover their half spaces successfully, and it led to their opposition constantly exploiting that area. While Spurs managed to cage the opposition's midfield, their narrow and compact positioning meant that the half spaces were left wide open and Leipzig constantly progressed the ball through those channels. Against Chelsea, however, we saw two different issues primarily come to light. Mourinho once again decided to sit deep and overcrowd the middle of the park in hopes of squeezing the ball away from the Blues and striking on the counter. But at times they would commit man forward and actually be proactive in their approach. But the Spurs were not compact enough when pressing Chelsea, and huge gaps between their lines appeared in the process, leaving the Blues with multiple dangerous options to exploit while playing from the back. You can see an example of a disjointed press by Spurs in this example. Their first two lines of the pressing squad charge forward, but the back line doesn't follow suit and is late to react, leaving Chelsea's player in a really dangerous position in the opposition's half, totally unmarked. All in all, it does seem like Mourinho is steadily improving Spurs, even though results are far from ideal. But there are also still issues that have to be ironed out if this team is to tango with the best of them. So far, we're yet to see that kind of Mourinho-like resolute performances from his Tottenham Hotspur team, and a lot more will be expected from the special one in the future.